Hi there, it's me, Jordan Van Haslo. Welcome to Jordan Van Haslo and Friends live on Hot 702.5 FM Las Vegas. Let's get on with the show. Welcome to another episode of Showtime with Jordan Van Haslo and Friends. I'm so excited to introduce you all to our next guest. He's a writer, he's a director, he's a producer. He's done a bunch of variety of things. And it turns out he went to school with Jose, our producer. Let's get this started. So Marco Ragozzino. Is the Ragozzino?
Ragazzino's good. If you wanted to do it the traditional Italian way, you got to have the fingers like this. And
the
it's
Ragozzino.
Ragozzino.
Well, it's such a pleasure to meet you and it's such a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So tell us a bit about what you're working on right now.
Well, right now I'm about to gear up to direct another short film because as you know, there's been a few strikes happening in the industry. So
a couple.
Yeah.
A couple.
Thankfully, one of them has been resolved, and I was able to work pretty steadily throughout it. Unfortunately, until the actors can resolve their situation, I'm basically working on my own personal projects while awaiting the word as to whether or not we're going back to pick up where we left off when things had to be put on pause. Traditionally, I guess for my regular work, I am a virtual production producer at a company called Fuse Effects. So I head up the virtual production department. For folks who are unfamiliar with what virtual production is, it is basically using real-time rendering to feed information into like the giant LED walls in order to help with things like in-camera visual effects, and also the big LED walls that you see that are being utilized on shows like The Mandalorian or a variety of almost everything is kind of using it in some shape or form now. But it got really popular when everyone saw how it was being utilized for The Mandalorian. So that's what I do during my regular work days when things are going smoothly and everything's in production.
Yeah.
And in my free time, I continue to pursue my own interests in writing and directing. And right now, what we're doing is a short film that we are shooting next month. And so I'm just prepping for that right now, keeping myself busy while things are slow.
That's pretty cool. I don't know if you saw, I was reading a Deadline earlier today, how like all of these A-listers like George Clooney and like a bunch of those types of people were like putting in money to try to move the actor strike. Did you see that? Did you read that? Did you read about that?
I didn't read it this morning, but I did see that like a lot of things that have reached a lot of the interim agreements that have been granted to like smaller productions, independent productions that have agreed to the terms and conditions that SAG has, because I mean, like they're so low budget that obviously they get a special pass when it comes to certain types of compensation for the actors and stuff. So I have seen that like a lot of independent productions that normally wouldn't get A-list actors are able to get A-list actors because of the interim agreements that have been granted to a lot of the smaller production companies.
Yeah, no, apparently like all of these actors are now have agreed to like lay out money to create a fund at SAG-AFTRA to allow people who are like, actors who are, below the line or below, who aren't like the A-list actors to get their residuals first. And the whole idea is that maybe this will help the strike. And so I do like literally this just came out today. I just read it like an hour ago. So I was just curious if you had read it.
I had not heard of that, but I will look into it as soon as I can. It sounds interesting to say the least. And I'm all for I'm all for whatever helps get us out of this situation, but also make sure that everyone feels like they've got a fair deal out of it.
Yeah, totally. So what's your story? So you came from Florida, right? You grew up in Florida, I believe.
Yeah, I lived for a little while when I was very, very small in New York, and then my family moved to Florida as most New Yorkers tend to do. So I spent my middle school and high school years in Florida, and then I went back to New York and went to the School of Visual Arts where I met Jose. I had gone to the pre-college program at SVA the summer before. So when I was in high school, I already kind of had an idea of like, that's kind of where I wanted to wind up. So I basically did like a summer camp, like a 3-week summer camp at the school, the summer before my senior year of high school, and really got a sense of like what the school was like and really, and at that point I had gone there for animation. When I actually wound up going to the School of Visual Arts, I wound up doing live action. I went into the live action film department. So I've always kind of had a keen interest in animation and live action storytelling. It was really, really hard to pick just one, which I think is what led me into visual effects, like a
Because it kind
subtle.
of like
Yeah.
merges kind of both of them. What was it
Yeah,
like? Was it when you were a kid? Was it like certain cartoons or things that you saw that you're like, oh my god, I want to make that my life?
I was a sponge for content when I was growing up. And I mean, it was kind of fun because it was the night, it was like the, I'm probably gonna age myself here, but like I grew up in like the heyday of like 90s animation, Animaniacs, Tiny Toons, Batman the Animated Series. Like these were all just like incredibly, and I think what really resonated with me about those shows was that they were so well written. And as a child, you're not really thinking about like the writing of a cartoon. A lot of those shows had such good writing teams and were so clever and didn't seem to like talk down to their audience the way like a lot
Mhm.
of children's programming felt at that time, but more of just sort of like embracing like being silly or positing situations that were a little bit more mature for a certain age group. Like I mean, if you go back and look at Batman the Animated Series, like it is wildly like adult, but at the same time like it's not so adult that it doesn't appeal to I don't know. It was just such a really cool like time for that type of show.
Yeah.
And at the same time, Jurassic Park was about to hit theaters, and I was at the perfect age to be just completely blindsided by that movie. Terrified me, made me feel all kinds of things. I was like most kids, I was super into dinosaurs, but no one had ever seen dinosaurs like behave like that, like actual animals, and seem so real at that point. Um, so I'm like 10 years old at this point. I really don't have much of a sense of like how these things are made, but like at that point I was like, I want to find out. I want to know everything about how this stuff came together or comes together. And I like read all these like cinema magazines and anything that had Steven Spielberg on the cover or was talking about the craft of making movies and stuff. I was kind of like, and like YouTube obviously didn't exist back then, and it was really hard to find stuff that you could reference.
Yeah,
So
you
I
had
was
to
just
like
sort of
either
like,
catch it on like the Late Show,
yeah,
or you had to like find like a magazine in like the Walgreens. It's like, oh, there's like a little 3 paragraphs about this person that I'm interested in learning about
yeah,
their how they came about. Yeah, totally.
yeah, yeah. And stuff, even back then, stuff would be announced and would never happen. Also, like it wasn't like today where, it's like, oh, this movie's been announced. Oh, you know what? It's going to be put on hold. Like 3 days later, it's like, that's being put on hold. You'd hear about like some version of like some movie that was going to go into production and you'd just be waiting for it. You're like, what happened? Uh, but, um, but yeah, so, and at that time too, like I was really starting to, I think I was like the only 12-year-old who knew who people like Phil Tippett were. And, um, like I knew who Spaz Williams was at that time, and Mark DePay, and nobody like now though. I mean, everyone kind of like once you move off to a place like Los Angeles or New York or whatever, and you start meeting like-minded people, then you start to realize that like, oh, there are lots of people like me out there in the world. We just weren't all clustered in one place at one time like we are now.
Yeah.
Um,
And we didn't have the, like you say, like the social media to where even if
right.
you're in West Palm Beach and I'm in Forest Park, Illinois, it's like we can connect and be like, oh my God, we're totally in sync with each other and
Yeah.
what we want to do. Yeah, totally.
Exactly. Yeah. So you kind of like felt like you were in this sort of outcast bubble situation where it was like, and I'm so jealous of kids now because like kids now, like, uh, being a nerd is so acceptable now and such part, like you don't even call it
Well,
like
it's
being a
almost
nerd.
like the
Yeah.
thing, right? Like now,
Yeah.
like being a nerd is like being the leading man, whereas once upon a time, it was like Revenge of the Nerds.
Yeah. Yeah. Like kids who are into anime are cool. Like they're cool. Now when I was growing up, if you were into that, you were like sitting by yourself at lunch.
Yeah. But
Um,
so do you think
yeah.
that that's a good thing or do you think that that's a bad thing? Because there's a part of me that thinks about that and thinks like, oh, we were kind of ahead of the curve. Like we were the cool kids because we were like not basic. You were doing our own thing. Whereas now anime and nerdism is kind of like what
Yeah.
everyone does.
Yeah, I think one of the cool things about um growing up during that time, or starting to discover things like starting to get into pop culture and starting to want to contribute to creating content in that space. I think what was cool about that was we were on the cusp of like the digital age, but still sort of one foot in the analog age. So like I'm thankful and grateful that I have had experience like actually shooting on film and editing film and like physically cutting it and taping it together. It really taught you things like how to shoot efficiently and economically and get what you want and know what you want like right away. And what's cool about the digital age is like we're not limited by that anymore, but that's also sort of like a problem too, because now we can just like crank out stuff minute after minute. Like there's billions and billions and billions of hours of stuff to watch on any given platform at any given moment. And and it almost feels like you have to work really really hard now to find the quality content that you're looking for. Whereas in the when I was growing up, like so few people were able to actually finish a project that even it getting finished meant that there was something special about it.
Totally. And it just even like doing it, right? Because you'd think
Yeah.
about it, it's like in order to like create this, we're gonna have to jump through a lot of hoops and spend a lot of money or spend a lot of time or whatever. So is this really the thing that we should be working on right now, or is this something better? Whereas kind of now you can just kind of throw it out there because so I totally
Yeah.
get that.
Yeah. And I'm also kind of thankful because also like that was obviously the time of like VHS and mini DV and all these like smaller digital but still sort of like easily accessible. So like I that's how I taught myself how to film things. Like I'd make little movies with my action figures using my dad's VHS camera, and then I'd like set up two VCRs in the living room and like try to edit things and figure and out. And at one point I was like begging my dad for like just RCA cables for Christmas. like I'm like a like I'm like a 12-year-old kid asking like, what do you want for Christmas this year? I'm like, RCA cables. so I can plug in audio and do, like, and my parents were just like, what are you, that's okay. Uh, so yeah, I mean, I'm grateful for having had that experience to learn how to do things that way. And because it makes me appreciate how far things have come at this point, and how like I can now just sort of, I hate to bring up AI at this point, but like, I can just type a prompt into something now and it just gives me what I want. But I also I'm glad that I know like how to get to that um
On
point
your
on my
own.
own. Yeah.
Hmm.
Instead of it, because my fear is that and if we could digress just a second here, like uh I feel like the process of creating art is at stake when you utilize something like that. You take the learning out of what it is that you're trying to do. You take that out of the equation, and I feel like that's something that we might lose if we
Yeah.
if we're not careful.
No, I totally agree with that. Because also it's like, what's an artist, right? Like you have an idea if you can just like have something else or someone else spit it out. And the thing is, it's not specific to AI, right? Like writers have been writing books with ghostwriters forever, right? Like what does it
Yeah.
mean if like I have an idea, but like if I don't have the tools to independently articulate that idea and put it out, does that make me an artist?
Yeah.
Or does it just make me a smart artist if I can put in the right prompt and it comes out?
Yeah. I remember actually this is a Jose story. I remember when I was in the animation building at SVA, I was doing something and I could only make the character move like from right to left. I couldn't figure out how to make him like come towards the camera and go back, into the distance.
Uh-huh.
And Jose taught me like, hey, that's perspective. Like like here's how you can learn perspective. And he like, drew the horizontal line on a piece of paper with the vanishing point and made you know, the grid so that you can figure out how things kind of move in and out of perspective. And like I took that with me for years. Like I still to this day remember like when I'm starting to doodle something like, oh yeah, make sure you figure out your perspective, whatever. And I'm hoping that like that kind of stuff will still exist, will still carry over. Because you can cheat that, right? You can totally cheat it. And you can also make something that you want to look a certain way without having to learn that whole lesson. But it's important to know what you're doing, right? It's important to know like why is this way, and why does it work this way? And you know, so yeah, I I hope that yeah, future artists like understand like that, understanding the process is part of the process itself.
Totally. No, totally. So you going to New York to study at SVA, at that moment were you like, oh, I'm going to become an animator and I'm going to create the greatest cartoon that man's ever seen? Or were you like, I just want to, work in this industry and this is my way in? And like, what were you thinking at that point?
I was thinking that at that point that I was going to sort of become somebody who maybe had at least one project, whether it was animation or live action, that was successful, that then I could build upon, and bringing my friends in and have my friends be people who were developing stuff and creating things, or people I admired, like people whose work I admired, like I could bring them into the fold. And so in some ways I kind of wanted to be like the head of a studio who was also an artist himself.
That's an oxymoron.
Yeah, but I mean, honestly, like it did work that way back in the day, like back in like the early days of film, and I'm a big film history buff too. Like,
Well, 100%, but we're
yeah,
talking about 100 years ago at this point.
yeah,
Like in
yeah.
terms of the way the business is now, I just mean that's an
Oh
oxymoron.
yeah,
Like everything
yeah.
is very corporate and everything is about stock price.
Right. And that was kind of like something that I was trying to like maybe figure out, like how can I do that, and still sort of like survive in this industry and kind of be like an independent filmmaker who also has enough resources and enough capital to, bring in other people to help them realize their vision, and then have this nice little like community of artists who are developing things and getting what their vision out, while at the same time like not being like so restricted by a corporate mandate of what things should be or have to be or whatever. So I kind of saw myself as that. Like am a I consider myself to be a jack of all trades. I'm not a master of like any one thing. I don't necessarily think I'm like the greatest artist of all time. I have huge respect for some of our alumni who we graduated with, who have gone off to do like amazing things. Like I'm still in touch with some of those folks, and I'm like in awe of what they've done. And I just wanted to like work with people like that and be in a community of people like that. So I didn't necessarily want to start off being a producer. I actually felt like I was going to hate being a producer, but I felt like I've kind of done pretty well with it, because I'm pretty good at like finding who I think are going to be like people who will work well together and do something cool with each other, and also like do the kinds of things that producers need to keep in mind which is like, can these people work well under pressure? Can they work well together? Can they do things on time? So yeah, just by making my own stuff, like I kind of learned how to do a lot of that. And I brought that with me into like my first few jobs as a producer. And then that led to visual effects production.
Yeah. You mentioned your parents earlier. Like, were they supportive of you? Like, were they supportive of like, yes, go to New York and go to SVA, or like, no, go to Wharton and become an accountant? What's going on with you?
In a perfect world, I think my dad would have wanted me to be like a really like an incredible stockbroker, and also like the star soccer player of Europe.
Of course.
Like
Those things go hand in hand.
yeah. But I think he like, at a certain point he realized that like, oh yeah, Marco's got other interests. And my mom was always super supportive. My dad sometimes didn't always understand what it was I wanted to do. I don't think my mom really did either, but I think they kind of saw from a very early age. I think that was really what was it. The fact that like from 10 years old up until now, I haven't changed. What I'm into and what I've liked to do has stayed the same. And I think that was a big that was hugely helpful in allowing them to
See, it wasn't just
support
like
me.
a fling or like a, oh, he's just, it's just a whim that he's on right
Yeah.
now. Like it's not a phase. What do they do for a living?
My dad's retired now. He was the food and beverage manager. My dad's an Italian immigrant, so I'm a first generation on his side, born here in the U.S. But he worked in the restaurant industry for most of his life, and he managed the food and beverage aspect of a country club in Delray Beach, Florida. But he's since retired from that, and my mom does like corporate travel. She works at a company and does all their she's been doing that for years too. Like my parents, my mom, she was from a very early age was like flying all over the world. She worked for Pan Am when that was a thing, and she was going all over the place and what like couldn't sit still.
As a flight attendant, my next door neighbors used to be flight. My old next door neighbors were flight. It was a husband and a wife, and they both met. They were both Pan Am flight
Oh,
attendants, and
that's
they would
cool.
tell me some awesome stories.
Yeah, my mom she wasn't a travel agent, but she worked in like the corporate office in the Pan Am building, which is now I think the MetLife building in New York.
Hmm.
So she worked for that office and like was always taking advantage of the fact that she could like fly places for free. And she actually met my dad on like in Bermuda or something.
Oh,
And
way over.
they were on like vacation or yeah. So that was kind of a whirlwind thing, but like they were
What do they
both
call it? Sanky panky. I'm teasing.
they yeah, they were both uh like just sort of I don't want to say like free spirited types, but like they were both people who understood that people have dreams and want to go places and do things because like they both sort of like not dropped what they were doing, but they left their hometowns and homelands and sought out other things for themselves. So at a certain point, I think they kind of recognized like, oh yeah, he takes after us. He's going to go to New York. He's going to want to go to LA. He's going to want to do these things. But at least we know like he's serious about it because he hasn't changed his opinion about it in like 15 years,
Are you an only child?
I am.
I'm an only child too. Isn't it wonderful?
Yeah. It's
I
one
was,
of I don't know if your teenage years you were under the microscope a lot during your teenage years, but yeah, it wasn't too bad.
no, I had nothing. Like I remember, like there was a brief period when I was like really, really young, where I was like, oh, I'd love like a baby brother or a baby sister. But then I started seeing my friends, and like Christmas would come along, and like half the things underneath the tree belong to the sibling. Or it was like, oh, we can't buy you this, Jordan, because your sister needs braces. And so, actually, very early on, I realized what a gift it was to be an only child.
Yeah. Yeah. There was a certain point where I was like, I wish I had like either an older, yeah, I was like, I wish I had an older sister just to take the heat off. Like someone else could have gotten like all the heat for a bit, and then I would have just
Because
like
you
kind of
can't blame things, right? When you're an
yeah,
only child, you can't be like, oh, I have no idea how that happened. It was like, yeah, but
yeah,
dummy, you're the only one in the house. So clearly
yeah.
you did it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because especially when I started driving, it was like, "Where are you going? What are you doing? Who's going to be there? We need all the phone numbers of everybody in the world." And you're like, "Oh my god, you know what? It's not even worth going out at the now because of all the extra work I have to do."
Did you ever feel, and this is a question I've been thinking about myself as an only child, and I've never asked another only child in the show, but have you ever felt, or did you ever feel at a particular time, um, that all of the pressure was on you because in terms of, um, you know, being the namesake, being the next generation, because there's like no other siblings who's like, oh, this one's taking over the family business, or this one's doing. Was that ever a thing that you had to kind of work through?
Um, kind of. Obviously, yes, you do feel a lot of pressure as an only child. You'd want to make sure that like you are doing um you're doing right by, you want to make sure that you like because so many sacrifices your parents make to ensure that you get the opportunities that you want. Like, so you don't want to, you do feel like, oh God, what if I screw this up? Or what if I waste this? Or what if I, like they've done so much and I don't want to disappoint them. So that was always kind of hanging over my head. Especially because, like, again, like what I said earlier, like I wanted to do this since I was 10 years old. So for me, my biggest thing was like, what if I fail at the thing that I've been obsessed with my whole life? Like that felt, that was the most pressure. But then at the same time, like my dad, especially, who doesn't understand, never once had any sort of experience with pursuing any sort of like artistic endeavor as a career, was basically like so nervous for me and was like, pounding into my head, like, make sure you have money in the bank no matter what. Make sure you don't ever get into any debt. Make sure you have a 401k. And I'm like 16. And I'm like, what's a
401 what?
Yeah. And so my dad would tell me these things. And I will say that, like, a lot of people kind of have this problem when they first like graduate college and they want to pursue something in the arts. Like, you go for it and then you realize, oh, I need to have some sort of backup plan job, right? While I'm pursuing my career in film. Like, if I want to be a director, if I want to be a writer, whatever, I gotta like just make money. If I don't come from a place where people are well connected and I can just be on someone's desk at a studio right out of college. So you wind up getting a job in a restaurant, or you wind up getting a job like at a retail store or whatever. And then that starts to like suck the life out of the thing that you went there to do. But you're just like, no, I just got to work. So a lot of like my early days in my 20s, because of like my dad making me feel like I just had to make money no matter what, I feel like in my early 20s, I had this really tough time sort of like digging my claws into the thing I actually wanted to do, because I felt this pressure to just generate some kind of income somehow, but luckily, when you're in your 20s, you have enough energy to be able to kind of like work all night and then and then get up the next day and be like, okay, let me go write some letters to some people at some studios and see if there's any openings.
Yeah. Did you have like a specific, like when you were coming out of school, did you have like a specific, I feel like we all kind of do, right? Because when you're really young, it's like the world is your oyster and you're like, okay, and then I'm going to do this and I'm going to win my first Emmy. And then I'm going to go over here and then I'm going to do this thing. And then I'm going to work on to the theater. Why not? And then I'll win a Tony and then I'll come over here. Like, did you have like an idea of when you were coming out of school, like, this is what my life is going to be? And how has the reality of that situation changed?
So this is so funny, because I was actually just having this conversation with my wife. Like, we have like long road trips to visit our in-laws, and we talk about stuff like this in the car for like hours. So she asked me like, what was it like when you first came to LA and what did you do? And I just told her my story, and she's like, oh my God. No, I was working on Long Island the summer when I graduated college. So 2005, I was working for the summer in Long Island. And at that time, I thought the money that I had saved working that job was going to get me to LA. And it was only three grand, right? So I had $3,000 in the bank after having worked a whole summer. And I was like, I am on my way. I am so rich. This is the most money I've ever had. So I just, so the people who I was working for were, once the job was coming to a close, because it was just for the summer, they were like, okay, we're going to start to wrap things up, and we have to do your flight arrangements to get you back to where you are going to go. So are you going back to Florida? Like, let us know. So, and I was like, oh, no, actually I live in LA. And I didn't live in LA. I just was like, yeah, that's because then when they told me they were going to take care of my plane ticket, I was like, oh, yeah, Los Angeles. That's where I'm going. So that's how I moved to LA. I actually took everything that I had with me at that job for that summer is what I moved to Los Angeles with. And I didn't tell my parents until I got to LA.
But that's
like,
kind
hey
of
guys,
badass, dude. Like, you literally you got a reload package to Los Angeles.
Yeah, I mean, it was in some ways I felt like that was the only way I was ever going to get there, because if I went home, I felt like my parents were going to convince me that I should stay there for a little while longer, formulate some kind of plan. And I probably should have formulated some kind of plan. I mean, like, don't just go there, like to have a plan. But I didn't. All I had was a couple friends who I knew from SVA who were currently living there, who had literally just moved there themselves. And I had one friend from high school who was in a play. So I was like, okay, great. That's everybody I need to know. And I'm all set. And so
I'm laughing because you're like, I have a friend in a play in LA. That's the person I need to know.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Like, oh yeah, some struggling actor is the person who's really going to help me.
Well, I just laugh because I come out of the theater in LA, like no one gives two shits about the theater. So it's just so funny to me. It's like, oh, my friend's in a play in LA. Off we go. Yeah. Anyways, continue.
But this is, well, one thing I will say to anybody who's like sort of, whoever's listening to this and they're sort of like in that situation where they're not, they're kind of debating about whether or not they should do something like that. I mean, if it wasn't for my friends, that support group that I had with my friends was the thing that really got me through that time. Otherwise, there's no way I would not have been able to survive. Like I had a friend who let me sleep on the floor for like 3 weeks. When I was in New York, I was also interning at, and that's another thing. Like if you're listening to this and you're in college, like intern at places. Cause like, those are going to be your first people you call when you're ready to work. I was interning at MTV Networks in New York during my junior and senior year of college at SVA. And when I moved to Los Angeles, it just so happened that the guy who I was interning for was doing a show in LA and needed an extra hand. So I got my first job like 2 weeks into like being in LA for a person I interned for. And at the time, like it was working in the art department for like America's Next Top Model or something for the season finale or for whatever. But that continued to like put money in my pocket and also introduced me to more people in the industry. And from there, I just kept doing all these odd freelance jobs, like PAing, and I PA'd for Warner Brothers. That was the most exciting day ever, was when like, imagine somebody from West Palm Beach who just like got to LA and is already like running around the Warner Brothers lot. That was like awesome. But I wouldn't have gotten those opportunities if it wasn't for the fact that like my network of people started off like this big and then got gradually bigger and bigger and bigger. And now it's at a point where you can reach out to just about anybody and be like, hey, have you heard of anything that's going on? They're like, oh yeah, come on board to this thing. It's starting up next week. So that's kind of what happens when you give yourself enough time and enough opportunities to like meet people and not necessarily like network, but also like prove to people that you are reliable, that you work hard, that you can, you not only do you talk the talk, but you walk the walk too. So right. all that goes towards like helping you build a good reputation and a good, reliability for when you're ready to just start, when you want to work and you have proven yourself a few times over, people are like, can't go wrong with this guy or this girl or whoever.
Yeah. Was LA where you always kind of wanted to be? I mean, like coming originally from New York, because I find I've lived in both, and I find that people generally tend to like gravitate towards one or the other. Like, oh my God, all I've ever wanted to do is live in LA, live in Hollywood, live in Beverly, wherever. And then there's other people who are like, screw LA, but New York is where it's at, and it's the New Yorker bust,
Yeah. I in a perfect world, I honestly wish that I could just go from one to the other, like half a year in one place, half a year in the other. I could totally, that would be like my perfect like lifestyle or like situation, because I can't really, Los Angeles is really great in terms of, obviously everyone comments on the weather. But it's LA and California has enough. And for me personally, like when I need to take like a mental health break from like the industry or something like that, like I'm a short drive to nature. right? Like
Mm-hmm.
it's like only like 5 miles to something where you feel like, oh, I'm outside the city.
You're not in the city. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
yeah, I'm relaxed. You know, there's things to do everywhere. And the environment and the landscape changes like from one neighborhood to the other. So you never really get that sense of like monotony in Los Angeles. You do, however, like your mental health can take a pounding in the entertainment industry. Um, the thing I miss about New York is just the variety of types of people that there are in New York. You never feel like you are surrounded by any one type, or that you have to like put on this like facade in order to interact with people in New
Yeah.
York. But I didn't do very well in January and February in New York. You know, like I don't
Like it's
uh
cold.
yeah, and I don't yeah, and only when I got older did I have an opportunity to really experience New York as like someone who lived there would. Because when I was in New York, I was a student and I was always broke. I was always like, you know, your social life was only with your friends at school, and it tended to be at someone's house or someone else's apartment or in the dorm, because you didn't have like a lot. At least
Right.
I didn't. You didn't have like a lot to do more things and like be, you know,
Like we're going out to this club, and then we're going to have
yeah,
dinner over here, and then we're going down to Balthazar, and then we're going to like. I get it.
yeah. I didn't. There wasn't a single fancy place that I didn't even know if you wanted to go someplace fancy in New York at that time in my life. I don't think I would ever have been able to like name a
Name a
place.
place.
You know, yeah. Um, so yeah, that was kind of the challenge of being that age in New York at that time. But as an adult, like, you know, I would totally have like my dream. I keep telling my wife, like, I was like, we should get like an apartment in New York for one half of the year, and then you know, have a house in LA, and then she keeps telling me like, yeah, we can do that, but you have to make like $5 billion a year. And I'm like, sure,
Where
yeah,
is
no
she?
problem.
Is she from California? Where is she from?
She is. She's from just slightly outside of LA County.
Yeah, see, you can't trust. It's the California people you can't trust. I
Yeah.
mentor a kid who's from Santa Monica, goes to school in New York now, goes to Purchase. And like people from California, like they don't get it. Like you can't. It's I always find it so interesting, like New York to LA. It's like New Yorkers often, I mean, not everybody, Jose, but New Yorkers often like really acclimate to Los Angeles because it's like the weather's cool. There's like, this is amazing. But I find that like people who are like born and raised in California, Southern California particularly, they come to New York and they're like, wait a second,
Yeah.
wait, people really live like this on purpose?
Yeah. It's so much easier to acclimate to LA than it is to do the reverse. But I do know like at least two people that I know from my friends who lived in LA first and then went to New York, and they love New York a lot more because LA, for their personality type, LA was too like just, it's like, oh, nothing, it took forever to get something done. Like people are just sort of like, they wake up at like, they start their day at like 11:30 in the morning,
With a
and
joint.
yeah, and so New York actually fit their own personal, I
Personality
guess,
a little
yeah, their
better.
personality a little bit better. Yeah.
Well, the way it was described to me, I remember when I was leaving to move to LA, I was working for Time Warner and I was moving to take a job at Sony Pictures. And one of my colleagues at Time Warner was actually born and raised in LA and he moved to New York for the job. And so I remember he walked up to me and he says, I'm going to tell you what someone told me when I was moving to New York. And if you can wrap your mind around this concept, you're going to do okay in LA. And he said, LA is yes, 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 no. But New York is no, 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 yes. And it clicked
Yeah.
for me. I was like, oh, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah. I would also say like in a less eloquent way, like LA is the kind of place where everyone's like, we should work together. We should do something. We should collaborate. And then you'll never hear from that person again. Whereas in New York, it's like, I'm not going to help you out unless you got a solid, like, you know, unless you got a plan, I'm not doing it.
Totally, 100%. But you found your spot. Where in LA are you based?
I'm in West Hollywood, actually.
Oh, okay, so you're not
Yeah.
right in the center.
Yeah. I've been in West Hollywood for a long time. And yeah, I mean, it's great. I think one of the things we like about it the most is that it's pretty centrally located, and the neighborhood is nice. It's like its own municipality. So it kind of like plays by its own rules, you know, first with certain things, which can be nice, especially when you want to get something done in the neighborhood. Yeah, so it's pretty cool.
Yeah, pretty awesome. So, okay, so just totally change gears completely. So we've talked about you've worked in live action, you've worked in animation. You also did a documentary, yes?
I'm still doing the documentary. It's going to be
Okay,
done November 30th, but yeah, I'm still working on it.
okay. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so during the pandemic, like a lot of people, I was starting to get a little stir crazy. Kind of started to feel like the rug had been swept out from under your feet, you know. Um, so I was trying to figure out like how I can utilize my time better, because I was starting to get in, you know, like a lot of people, I was starting to like spiral, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and like not be very like productive. So I had been in touch with a facility down in West Palm Beach where my parents live. A few times when I was visiting, I would take my wife to this place called the Loggerhead Marine Life Center, which is effectively it's a sea turtle hospital, and it's located on the shore of Juno Beach, and that is a federally protected stretch of 9 miles of beach where sea turtles like nest in record numbers like every year. It's really cool, and what they do there is really cool. And we visited like twice, and like around the second time, my wife was like, "You should do something for them. That's such a great facility. It feels like they would really benefit from having like more content." So I was like, "Yeah, that's a good idea." And what started off as like maybe a small video about them, like a 2 or 3 minute video, like I wound up with like 6 or 7 hours worth of interviews and tons and tons of B-roll footage of these people doing incredible things with saving sea turtles and operating on them and removing like plastic particles from their stomachs, and you know, healing turtles that had got hit by boats or things like that. And I really wanted to tell their story. So I just like periodically for like the past 3 years, anytime I go down to visit my parents, I just bring all my camera equipment with me. I bring the drone, I bring all this stuff. I look like, you know, I look like a one-man production facility every time I travel. And I've just been getting as much content as I can from the facility. They've actually been the cool thing is when I first started doing the documentary, they were just sort of like this small little one building shack basically on the beach. And in the past 3 years, their facility has turned into this massive um, ecological and educational center. So I was kind of lucky. And when I started the project, they were just like this tiny little building. And now when you look at the film, you start to see the facility get bigger and bigger and bigger. And now it's finally finished. And they have this major presence down in South Florida. And their message is all about like conservation and ocean health. And they do that via the sea turtles, because there is nothing more magical than when you see like these things in front of you and you're like, oh my God, they can get to be the size of like a small car. And they're also like the cutest little things when they're hatchlings. So like it's just really, really fascinating. And the work that they do is great. So I've just been documenting what they do and trying to tell their story and putting it all together.
Oh, that's wonderful. Do you anticipate it being a feature, or do you anticipate it being a like a series, or do you like a
Uh,
short? Like how do you see the final product?
I think it'll be a short, but it'll be like on the longer side of what a short film is. So maybe like 30-ish, 45 minutes. There's enough there to keep your interest for that long. But I'd rather keep it like short and sweet and entertaining and informative, rather than kind of like use every single thing I shot and feel like maybe I'll lose the audience at a certain point, because the message will be like, okay, yeah, we get it, you know.
Right.
But the cool thing is like there is an animated segment in the middle of it. So this is actually kind of like a cool way for me to finally be able to combine my interests in live action and animation. And I never once thought it would be via a documentary, but the woman who founded the Marine Life Center in like 1983, she's no longer with us. And she actually was a retired woman. She was already retired when she founded the facility. This was like her second her
Like
like
project,
second
like project or whatever. Like,
yeah,
yeah.
it was her
Initiative.
second career after she retired from like real estate or something in New Jersey. But anyway, she came to like South Florida, and she got smitten with the turtles one night when she was walking on the beach, and she saw like how incredible they were and realized that they were in like danger. Like they were literally being poached. They were endangered. They were a threatened species. And so this like 65-year-old woman made it her mission to change the public perception about it and like actually save the turtles. And she's like one of the very first conservationists that like people know of.
Oh, wow.
But unfortunately, like no one ever documented anything during her time. Like there's no film footage, there's no video footage of her doing it. There's some newspaper articles here and there. But so what we decided to do was I hired an animator who's based in Atlanta to help me animate her story. So there's a segment of the documentary that is her story, but is all animated, and it looks gorgeous. And I'm really excited about that because I really loved. The animator's name is Richard Draper, and he's worked on a lot of stuff that I think people have seen. And his style, he has that mid-century modern sort of Hanna-Barbera animation style.
Yeah.
And so we took that and like elevated it a little bit and made like these really gorgeous backgrounds with his like old school mid-century modern animation style. And I'm really excited for people to check that out because I think it does based on the time period in which like her story takes place, the animation really lends itself to telling her story that way. And I think it's really cool, and I can't wait to show it to people.
Oh, that's so exciting. How much longer until you guys are like until you think it's going to be out for the public?
So the facility is going to approve my cut. Hopefully they approve my cut by November 30th. And then once they've signed off on all the information and that all the information in the documentary is accurate and that they approve of it, then we will put the finishing touches on it.
That's exciting. That's so cool. Well, so what's that like? How do you like that versus, I mean, yes, there's some animation in this, but versus like a lot of the other projects that you've worked on live action, like, because the documentary process is like a completely different thing and world and how you attack it and how you put it together and who you have to collaborate with and the type of personalities you have to collaborate with.
Yeah, it was really tough. And again, like this is where, remember when I said like when you're going to move to LA, have a plan. When you're going to make a documentary, have a plan. Because just like a and I should have known better because I make live action films all the time and we never do anything without a script. But for this film, because we started in the pandemic and I was just like, just get me out of here and just get me somewhere where I can like film something and be creative. I kind of just dove right into it. And what took a long time to make this particular documentary was the fact that I wasn't sure like what the story should be. In my head, I was like, I'm just going to tell the story of the facility and the people there. And so now the documentary has kind of become a series of like maybe like more so vignettes of individuals who work there and what their relationship is with the facility and why they like working there. I also have someone there. There's one of their main scientists is hearing impaired, and she communicates via American Sign Language.
Okay.
And I felt like that is someone who's really important for people to see because she did not let any of that affect the fact that she is out there saving sea turtles and operating on them and collecting data from the nesting sites and everything, and seeing her interact with her, how everyone around her has adapted to the way she does things was like super inspiring. And I feel like having more visibility on someone like her, I think will be hugely inspiring to like not just people who are interested in pursuing that career or wanting to be more of a conservationist, but also people who feel like maybe they can't do something because of a hindrance. Like
Right.
she's kind of basically like, nope, you can do it. Anybody can do it. And I feel like
Yeah.
that's those kinds of things are the nuggets that you kind of like, you start to pull out once you start sifting through the footage and start figuring out how you're going to structure things. So right now, the way I'm kind of putting it together is we're going to just feature, the human aspect of like what this means to people and why it's important to take care of these animals, because they are indicative of like our health. If there's something wrong with them, that means there's something wrong with the ocean. If there's something wrong with the ocean, we're in trouble.
We're all screwed. Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. No, I think that that's awesome. So, my last question for you, like, what in a perfect world would be the next thing to do? Like, if I were to say, you know what, here's 10, screw it. Here's $20 million tax free to create your next project. What does that look like? What would that be?
So I just finished writing a feature, and that
You're
would
like,
totally
actually, now that you mention
that.
it,
Yeah, that's what I would
let's
do.
take a
That's
coffee.
And funny you mentioned it, because $20 million is probably like the way the script is written now. I'm probably gonna need about that much. But yeah, that would be my next thing. My next thing would be to just like go for broke and just do the feature film, because I've been dancing around that like my whole life, and that's what I've always wanted to do. And I'm getting a little tired of like kind of putting it off and saying I'm not ready yet, or like, oh, I need more experience, or I need to learn more. I'm like, no, it's the time is now, because it's only going to get harder.
And more expensive.
Yeah, exactly.
What type of a film is it? Is it a rom-com? Is it a horror? Is it a comedy? Is it a drama?
So when I'm not, so the Sea Turtle documentary is like its own thing that like sits in a completely different like planet from the other things that I do. So my brand, which is I would consider it Twilight Zone but funny. So I love doing like things that are focused on something extraordinary that is happening to an ordinary person, that is somewhat in like the supernatural or cosmic sort of realm, but also has like a sense of humor about it.
Yeah.
Because I feel like nothing gets the audience invested in a character more than when they know that that character has a sense of humor about either what's going on, or just I don't know how to describe it. I just feel like having a sense of fun about it is what I enjoy about movies. Like anything that has, I'm a huge fan of things like Brendan Fraser's The Mummy. I love stuff like that. So I did write something that is kind of in that vein,
Okay.
where it's like a supernatural element that is pursuing people, but the people are, they're witty and they're smart, and they understand like what's going on, and they're doing their best to try to like fight it, while at the same time like working on their own personal relationships with each other. So yeah, and it
Yeah.
also it takes place in the Hollywood environment too, so that's also kind of fun, because I also like to make stuff about Hollywood.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. So I would love to keep talking to you, but we actually have a show that bumps into ours, and we also have
Sure.
what are they called? Sponsors. And I don't say that meanly, because like we like our sponsors. So before we sign off, where can everyone find you? Where can we keep up with the Sea Turtles, and where can we also keep up with your wonderful feature that you're going to get $20 million for soon?
Well, yeah, I mean, my Instagram handle is Marco-Vision Studios. My website is also marcovisionstudios.com. You can see everything I've worked on is there, and it's all very nicely sifted into categories. So hopefully that is easy for everyone to find. And then I just started a TikTok account under Marco-Vision Studios as well, but I haven't posted anything yet because I'm still figuring out how TikTok works.
Oh my God, you're going to start dancing and things like that?
Well, hopefully it'll be things that are filmmaker related and interesting to filmmakers, but
You need a bunch of sea turtles. I think sea
yeah.
turtles will like totally. Was it children and animals? Like TikTok? That's what it's about. Get the
Yeah,
sea turtles out.
It'll be sea turtles dancing, doing TikTok dances.
There you go. Well, thank you so much, Marco Ragozzini. It was such a pleasure to get acquainted with you this afternoon, and I hope we can chat again.
Yeah, thanks again for having me. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Jordan, and thank you, Jose, for having me.
Absolutely. And thank you all in Radioland for listening to me and Marco Ragozzino. And we'll see you next week and chat with you next week for another episode of Showtime with Jordan Van Hassel and Friends, right here on Hot 702.5 FM Las Vegas.